Black elderly farmer denied ride in first class learns private jet awaits. The commotion at gate B-17 drew stares from every direction. 78-year-old Elijah Washington stood rigid, his weathered hands gripping the counter as the gate agent's voice rose above the airport bustle. "Sir, I've already explained your ticket is for economy class. You cannot board with the first-class passengers." The agent's patience was wearing thin, her fingernails tapping against the keyboard. Elijah's eyes, clouded with cataracts but still sharp with dignity, didn't waver. "Young lady, I worked 57 years on my farm, never missed a day. I saved for months to buy this ticket, and it says first class right here." His finger, knuckles swollen from decades of labor, pointed at the paper ticket in his hand. Behind him, a line of irritated travelers shifted impatiently. A businessman in an expensive suit loudly cleared his throat. "Some of us have connections to make," he called out. The gate agent glanced at her computer screen again. "Mr. Washington, there's been a mistake in your booking. The system shows—" "There's no mistake," Elijah interrupted, his voice steady but strained. "I called your airline 3 times to confirm, spoke to a gentleman named Robert just yesterday." The businessman stepped forward, placing his briefcase on the counter. "Is there a problem with boarding? We're already 15 minutes behind schedule." "Sir, please wait your turn," the agent said before turning back to Elijah. "Mr. Washington, I need to ask you to step aside so I can board these first-class passengers. We can discuss your situation afterward." Elijah didn't move. The dignity of 78 years wouldn't allow it. "I'm not stepping aside, not again, not anymore." A young woman in a crisp uniform approached from behind the counter. "Is everything all right here, Brenda?" she asked the gate agent. "Ms. Carter," the agent said with evident relief. "This gentleman insists he has a first-class ticket, but the system shows—" The young woman, Ms. Carter, glanced at Elijah, then at his ticket, then at her tablet. Her expression changed subtly. "Mr. Washington, Elijah Washington." Elijah nodded, still clutching his ticket. Ms. Carter smiled, and it transformed her entire face. "Mr. Washington, there's been a change to your travel arrangements today." She gestured toward the large windows overlooking the tarmac. "If you'll look outside, you'll see a Gulfstream G650 that just taxied in. That's your ride today." Elijah's expression froze. "I don't understand." "Sir," Ms. Carter continued, "your flight has been upgraded. That private jet is waiting for you." The businessman behind Elijah stepped back, his irritation transforming into confusion. Elijah's hand trembled slightly as he turned toward the window. "That can't be right." "I'm just a farmer from Georgia." "Not just any farmer, Mr. Washington," Ms. Carter said softly. "If you'll come with me, there's someone waiting to meet you." But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when Elijah Washington stepped off the bus at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, carrying nothing but a small leather suitcase that had belonged to his father. The morning sun was just beginning to warm the Georgia air as Elijah made his way through the sliding doors of the South Terminal. He moved deliberately, the way a man does when he's spent a lifetime working the land conserving energy, wasting no motion. His Sunday best suit, pressed the night before, hung a little loose on his frame. He'd lost weight since Martha's passing 2 years ago. Today was special. For the first time in his 78 years, Elijah Washington was going to fly first class. He had never been one for extravagance. Frugality was as much a part of him as his weathered hands and the slight stoop to his shoulders. But this trip was different. This trip was for Martha. "Next, please." The check-in agent's voice pulled Elijah from his thoughts. He approached the counter, carefully placing his ancient suitcase and the printed confirmation of his ticket on the counter. "Good morning," Elijah said, the politeness instilled by his parents still strong after all these decades. "I'm flying to San Francisco today." The agent, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, smiled at him. "Good morning. May I see your ID, please?" Elijah reached into his inside jacket pocket and produced his driver's license, renewed just last year despite Martha's gentle suggestion that perhaps, at his age, he might consider giving up driving. He had refused. On the farm, 30 miles outside of Atlanta, a man needed his independence. "Thank you, Mr. Washington," the agent said, typing his information into her computer. Her fingers paused, and she looked up at him with a slightly different expression. "I see you're flying first class with us today." Elijah nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Yes, ma'am, first time." "Well, we're delighted to have you," she said, her fingers resuming their dance across the keyboard. "Any checked luggage today?" "Just this," Elijah said, patting his suitcase. "Carry on." The agent looked at the vintage leather case doubtfully. "Sir, I'm not sure if that will fit in the overhead compartment. Would you like to check it? There's no charge for first-class passengers." Elijah's hand remained on the suitcase. "No, thank you, it stays with me. It'll fit." The agent didn't push the issue. She printed his boarding pass and handed it to him along with his ID. "You're all set, Mr. Washington. Your flight departs from gate B17 at 11:45 a.m. Boarding will begin at 11:00. As a first-class passenger, you're welcome to use our lounge, which is located upstairs past security." Elijah carefully tucked the boarding pass into his jacket pocket alongside his ID. "Thank you kindly." As he turned to head toward security, the agent called after him. "Mr. Washington, enjoy your first-class experience." Elijah nodded and made his way toward the security checkpoint, his mind drifting back to the conversation he'd had with his daughter, Josephine, just a week earlier. "Daddy, you don't need to do this," Josephine had said over the phone, her voice carrying the same worried tone it had developed after Martha's passing. "I can come to you, or we can drive together." "No, Josie," Elijah had replied firmly. "Your mother wanted her ashes scattered at Baker Beach. She talked about that view of the Golden Gate Bridge for years after our honeymoon. I'm going to do this right. But first class, Daddy, that's so expensive. Mom wouldn't want you spending your savings like that." Elijah had chuckled. "Your mother spent 56 years telling me what she didn't want me spending money on. This time I get to decide." The memory warmed him as he placed his suitcase on the conveyor belt at security. The TSA agent, a young man who reminded Elijah of his grandson, looked at him with a hint of concern. "Sir, you'll need to remove your shoes and jacket and any metal items from your pockets." Elijah nodded, carefully slipping off his well-polished dress shoes and removing his jacket. The simple gold wedding band on his left hand caught the fluorescent light as he placed his belongings in the plastic bin. "That's a nice ring," the TSA agent commented. "Anniversary." 56 years, Elijah replied, his voice softening. "Would have been 58 next month." The young man's expression shifted to one of understanding. "I'm sorry for your loss, sir." Elijah nodded his thanks and walked through the metal detector without incident. On the other side, he carefully put his shoes back on, slipped his jacket over his shoulders, and collected his suitcase. The walk to Concourse B was longer than Elijah had anticipated. He passed shops selling overpriced souvenirs, restaurants offering quick meals at slow dining prices, and gates filled with travelers staring at phones and tablets. The world had changed so much in his lifetime. He remembered when air travel was an event, when people dressed up and treated it as something special. Now it seemed as commonplace as catching a bus. By the time Elijah reached the first-class lounge, he was grateful for the chance to rest. He presented his boarding pass to the attendant at the entrance, a professionally dressed woman who welcomed him with a warm smile. "Welcome, Mr. Washington. Please make yourself comfortable. We have complimentary beverages and light refreshments. Your flight will be boarding in approximately 45 minutes. The lounge was unlike anything Elijah had experienced before. Plush chairs, quiet conversation, and large windows overlooking the runways where massive planes took off and landed with surprising grace for their size. He settled into a comfortable chair near the window, placing his suitcase carefully beside him. A young attendant approached him. "Can I get you anything to drink, sir?" Elijah considered for a moment. "Coffee, please, black." "Of course, would you care for any breakfast? We have pastries, fruit, and a small buffet." Elijah shook his head. "Just the coffee, thank you." As the attendant walked away, Elijah noticed a man in an expensive suit watching him from across the lounge. Their eyes met briefly before the man returned his attention to his laptop. Elijah was used to such looks, curiosity, sometimes judgment. At 78, being one of the few black faces in certain spaces was something he had navigated his entire life. The coffee arrived, served in a proper ceramic cup on a small saucer. Elijah thanked the attendant and took a careful sip. It was good coffee, strong and fresh. Martha would have appreciated it. She had always been particular about her coffee. Elijah's thoughts drifted to San Francisco, to the trip he and Martha had taken there for their honeymoon in 1966. They had saved for 2 years to afford it, a week in a small hotel with a view of the bay. It had been Martha's dream to see the Golden Gate Bridge, to walk along Baker Beach and feel the Pacific Ocean on her toes. They had promised each other they would return someday. Someday never came. Life happened, children, the farm, bills to pay. There was always a reason to put it off until next year, until things were more settled. And then Martha got sick, and suddenly there were no more years to put it off. Final call for first-class passengers on Delta Flight 1289 to San Francisco. Please proceed to Gate B17. The announcement pulled Elijah from his memories. He checked his watch, an old Timex that had been a gift from Martha on their 25th anniversary, and realized he had lost track of time. He quickly gathered his suitcase and made his way to the gate, moving as swiftly as his knees would allow. By the time he arrived at gate B-17, a line had already formed for first-class boarding. Elijah took his place at the end, behind a woman with two small children and a man in a familiar, expensive suit, the same one who had been watching him in the lounge. The gate agent's voice came over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now boarding our first-class passengers for Delta Flight 1289 to San Francisco. Please have your boarding passes ready." Elijah reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his boarding pass, holding it carefully in his hand. He watched as the passengers ahead of him presented their passes and were welcomed aboard. The woman with the children went first, then the man in the suit. When Elijah stepped up to the counter, he placed his boarding pass on the scanner. The machine beeped, and the gate agent, a different woman from the one who had checked him in, frowned slightly. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, looking at her screen. "There seems to be an issue with your boarding pass." And that brings us back to where we started, Elijah standing firm at the gate, refusing to step aside as Ms. Carter revealed that a private jet was waiting for him. Josephine Washington descended the steps quickly, her arms already reaching for her father. At 53, she had Martha's smile and Elijah's determined chin. She embraced him tightly. "Josie, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in San Francisco." Josephine pulled back, her eyes shining. "Change of plans. I couldn't let you make this journey alone." "But the private jet, that's what I need to explain," Josephine said, taking his hand. "Come aboard, there's someone you need to meet." Still bewildered, Elijah followed his daughter up the steps of the private jet, Captain Reynolds following behind with Elijah's suitcase despite his protests. The interior of the aircraft was like nothing Elijah had ever seen, all leather seats and polished wood with enough room to stand upright. Seated near the front of the cabin was a young man Elijah didn't recognize. He stood as they entered, smoothing his tailored suit nervously. "Mr. Washington," the young man said, extending his hand. "I'm Marcus Chen. It's truly an honor to meet you." Elijah shook the offered hand automatically. "I'm afraid you have the advantage, Mr. Chen. I don't believe we've met." "No, sir, we haven't," Marcus agreed. "But I know you, or rather, I know your work." Elijah's confusion deepened. "My work?" "I'm a farmer." "Not just any farmer," Marcus said, gesturing for Elijah to take a seat. "Mr. Washington, you're the man who developed the Washington method of sustainable crop rotation that saved my family's farm in 1978. Elijah slowly sank into the offered seat, his eyes never leaving the young man's face. "The article in Farmer's Almanac," he said quietly. "That was nearly 50 years ago." Marcus nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir. My grandfather cut it out and implemented your techniques on our struggling farm in California's Central Valley. It saved our livelihood during the drought." Josephine sat beside her father, placing a hand on his arm. "Marcus is the CEO of Agritech Innovations now, Daddy. His company is revolutionizing sustainable farming practices across the country. Based on your principles," Marcus added. "Your ideas were ahead of their time, Mr. Washington. Soil conservation, natural pest control, water management. You were practicing climate-smart agriculture before it had a name." Elijah's weathered hands rested on his knees. "I was just trying to keep my family fed during hard times. And in doing so, you created a system that could help feed the world," Marcus said. "Mr. Washington, my company has been trying to track you down for months. When your daughter contacted us about your trip to San Francisco, I knew this was the perfect opportunity." Elijah turned to Josephine. "You knew about this?" She nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I wanted to surprise you. When I called Agritech to see if they might want to interview you about your farming methods while we were in San Francisco, I had no idea they'd been looking for you." "For what purpose?" Elijah asked, turning back to Marcus. "Mr. Washington, Agritech Innovations is launching a new foundation dedicated to supporting small family farms and promoting sustainable agricultural practices. We want to name it after you, the Washington Institute for Sustainable Agriculture." Elijah's expression remained carefully neutral, though his eyes betrayed his surprise. "I'm just one farmer among many. A farmer whose methods have stood the test of time," Marcus countered. "Your article from 1978 is still cited in agricultural science journals today. What you achieved with limited resources and no formal training is remarkable." Captain Reynolds appeared at the front of the cabin. "We're cleared for takeoff, Mr. Chen. Everyone please buckle up." As Elijah fastened his seatbelt, he glanced out the window at the commercial airliner he had been meant to board, the first-class seat he had saved for months to purchase. It seemed so distant now, like another life. "I still don't understand about the ticket," Elijah said as the jet began to taxi. "I bought a first-class ticket on Delta." Josephine squeezed his hand. That was me, Daddy. When Mr. Chen offered to fly us on his company jet, I called the airline to cancel your ticket. But there was a mix-up. They didn't remove you from the manifest. That's why the gate agent was confused. The jet accelerated down the runway, pressing Elijah gently back into his seat. In moments, they were airborne, climbing rapidly above Atlanta, the city where Elijah had sold his produce at farmers' markets for decades. "Mr. Washington," Marcus said once they had reached cruising altitude, "I'd like to hear more about how you developed your farming methods. My grandfather always said you were a genius who never got the recognition you deserved." Elijah's gaze remained on the clouds outside the window. "There's not much to tell. I watched the land, listened to it. My daddy taught me that farming isn't about forcing the earth to give up its bounty. It's about working with nature, not against it." "That's exactly the philosophy our foundation wants to promote," Marcus said eagerly. "Industrial agriculture has lost that connection. We want to bring it back." A flight attendant appeared with a tray of drinks. "Gentlemen, Ms. Washington, what can I get you?" Josephine requested sparkling water. Marcus asked for coffee. When the attendant turned to Elijah, he hesitated before speaking. "Do you have sweet tea?" The attendant smiled. "We certainly do, Mr. Washington. I'll bring that right away." As she moved away, Elijah turned to Marcus. "Young man, I appreciate your interest in my farming methods, but I have to ask, why go to all this trouble? A phone call would have sufficed." Marcus exchanged a glance with Josephine before answering. "Mr. Washington, Agri-Tech Innovations is prepared to offer you a Lifetime Achievement Award that includes a grant of $1 million to establish the Washington Institute." Elijah's expression didn't change, but his hands, those hands that had worked the earth for more than 7 decades, tightened slightly on the armrests of his seat. "I never farmed for recognition," he said quietly. "No," Marcus agreed. "You farmed to feed your family and your community. But your methods deserve to be shared, studied, and implemented on a larger scale, especially now with climate change threatening agricultural stability worldwide." The flight attendant returned with their drinks. Elijah took a sip of his sweet tea and was surprised to find it properly made, sweet but not cloying, with a hint of lemon, just the way Martha used to make it. "My wife would have appreciated this tea," he said, more to himself than to the others. Josephine's eyes softened. "Mom would have loved all of this, Daddy. She was always so proud of your farming innovations." "Your late wife was Martha Washington, correct?" Marcus asked. "I read about her in the community profile the Atlanta Journal-Constitution did on your farm in 1982. Elijah nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Married 56 years. She used to say she was married to the first president's namesake." "I understand you're traveling to San Francisco to honor her memory," Marcus said gently. "Yes," Elijah confirmed. "She always wanted to return to Baker Beach. We spent our honeymoon there in '66. Marcus leaned forward. "Mr. Washington, I've taken the liberty of arranging accommodations for you and your daughter at the Fairmont in San Francisco. It's the same hotel where you and Mrs. Washington stayed on your honeymoon, isn't it?" Elijah's eyes widened slightly. "How did you know that?" Josephine answered, "I told him, Daddy. I found Mom's honeymoon photos in the old album." "The presidential suite is reserved for you," Marcus continued. "And we've arranged for a private ceremony on Baker Beach tomorrow morning for Mrs. Washington's ashes, if that's acceptable to you." Elijah looked out the window again at the vast expanse of clouds below them. From this height, the patchwork of American farmland wasn't visible, the countless small family farms fighting to survive in an era of industrial agriculture and climate uncertainty. "Mr. Chen," Elijah said after a long moment, "I appreciate your generosity, but I need to understand what exactly you're proposing with this institute." Marcus reached into his briefcase and pulled out a tablet. "I was hoping you'd ask. I've prepared a presentation." For the next hour, as they flew over the American heartland, Marcus outlined his vision for the Washington Institute, a research center dedicated to developing and disseminating sustainable farming practices for small-scale farmers, with a particular focus on historically underserved farming communities. The institute would offer grants, education, and technical support to farmers transitioning to more sustainable methods. "The key," Marcus explained, "is that we want to make these techniques accessible to everyone, not just large operations with massive capital. Your methods prove that sustainable farming can be done without expensive equipment or corporate backing." Elijah listened carefully, asking occasional questions that revealed his deep understanding of agricultural challenges. As Marcus concluded his presentation, Elijah nodded slowly. "You've clearly given this a lot of thought," he said. "But I still don't understand why you need my name on it. My methods aren't unique. They're based on principles farmers have known for generations." But you documented them, Marcus countered. You tested them, refined them, and shared them when others were embracing chemical-intensive farming. You held firm to your principles even when government programs were pushing farmers in the opposite direction. Josephine, who had been quiet during the presentation, spoke up. Daddy, remember when the extension agent told you to increase your pesticide use in the 70s? You refused and nearly lost your USDA support. Elijah's eyes crinkled at the memory. That young man thought I was a stubborn old fool, told me I'd lose everything if I didn't modernize. But you didn't, Marcus said. Your farm thrived while others around you struggled with declining soil health and increasing chemical costs. It wasn't easy, Elijah admitted. There were lean years. Which makes your success even more remarkable, Marcus said. Mr. Washington, your story isn't just about farming methods, it's about perseverance, wisdom, and foresight. That's why we want your name on this institute. The flight attendant approached again. We'll be beginning our descent into San Francisco in about 20 minutes. Can I get anyone a refill before we prepare for landing? As she refreshed their drinks, Elijah gazed out the window at the approaching California coastline. The last time he had seen this view, he had been a young man of 23, holding Martha's hand as they flew into San Francisco on a commercial flight, seated in economy class, their savings nearly depleted by the expense. Now he was returning in a private jet, being offered a $1 million grant and the chance to see his life's work recognized and continued. It seemed impossible. Josie, he said quietly once the attendant had moved away. What do you think about all this? Josephine's eyes were bright with emotion. I think Mom would be so proud, Daddy. She always said your farming methods were special, that you were ahead of your time. Elijah's gaze returned to Marcus. Young man, if we proceed with this institute, I have some conditions. Marcus straightened in his seat. Of course, Mr. Washington, anything. First, it can't just be about my methods. There are other farmers, particularly black farmers and other farmers of color, who developed similar sustainable techniques out of necessity. Their contributions need to be recognized, too. Marcus nodded, making notes on his tablet. Absolutely. We want this to be inclusive. Second, Elijah continued, this institute needs to focus on helping the next generation of small farmers. The average age of American farmers is nearly 60. We need young people to see farming as a viable future. Completely agree, Marcus said. That's already part of our vision: scholarships, apprenticeships, and startup grants for young farmers. And third, Elijah said, his voice taking on the firm tone that Josephine recognized from her childhood, I want Martha's name alongside mine, the Washington Institute. Without her support, her sacrifices, her wisdom, none of my work would have been possible. Marcus smiled broadly. Mr. Washington, I would be honored to make that happen. The Martha and Elijah Washington Institute for Sustainable Agriculture has a perfect ring to it. The jet began its descent into San Francisco, the city sprawling below them, the iconic Golden Gate Bridge visible in the distance. As the wheels touched down at San Francisco International Airport, Elijah felt a sense of completion, as if a circle begun 59 years ago was finally closing. On the tarmac, a sleek black car was waiting to take them to the Fairmont Hotel. As they descended the steps of the private jet, Captain Reynolds shook Elijah's hand again. It was an honor to fly you today, Mr. Washington. My grandfather was a farmer in Georgia, too. Men like you paved the way for all of us. Elijah nodded his thanks, too overwhelmed to speak. The California air felt different from Georgia, cooler, crisper, with the tang of salt from the nearby ocean. It brought back memories of Martha, young and beautiful, her face alight with joy as they explored San Francisco together. The drive from the airport to the hotel took them through the city past neighborhoods that had changed dramatically since Elijah's last visit nearly 6 decades earlier. Yet the hills, the bay, the fog hovering over the Golden Gate, these remained the same. When they arrived at the Fairmont, Elijah was astonished to find the hotel staff lined up to greet him. The manager stepped forward, extending his hand. Mr. Washington, welcome to the Fairmont. We're honored to have you with us again after all these years. Elijah shook the offered hand, his confusion evident. How did you know I stayed here before? The manager smiled. Mr. Chen's office provided us with the details. We've prepared the presidential suite according to his instructions, and we've taken the liberty of recreating some elements from the hotel as it was in 1966. In the suite, Elijah found a photograph on the bedside table, a black and white image of himself and Martha standing in front of the Fairmont on their honeymoon, young and full of dreams. Beside it was a vase containing blue hydrangeas, Martha's favorite flowers. How did you get this photograph? Elijah asked, turning to Josephine. It was in Mom's album, she explained. I had it scanned and sent it to Mr. Chen's assistant. Elijah sat heavily on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the day's events. This is all too much, Josie. Josephine sat beside him, taking his hand in hers. Daddy, you deserve this recognition. All those years of hard work, all those sacrifices you and Mom made, it meant something. It mattered. Elijah's eyes filled with tears. I wish she could see this. She can, Josephine said softly. You know Mom. She's probably looking down right now, telling the angels all about how she always knew you were a genius. That drew a chuckle from Elijah. She was stubborn that way. A knock at the door announced the arrival of their luggage, Elijah's ancient suitcase and Josephine's modern rolling bag. Marcus had excused himself to his own room, promising to join them for dinner later if they felt up to it. Alone with his daughter, Elijah moved to the window. The view was spectacular, the city below, the bay beyond, and in the distance the Golden Gate Bridge standing proud against the afternoon sky. Tomorrow morning, he said quietly, we'll take Martha to Baker Beach. Josephine joined him at the window. Yes, Daddy, just like she wanted. Elijah turned to his daughter, his expression serious. Josie, about this institute, do you really think it's the right thing? I'm an old man, I won't be around to see it grow. But your legacy will, Josephine replied. Think of all the farmers who could benefit from what you've learned, all the land that could be saved. And besides, she added with a smile, I've seen you with my grandchildren. You're not going anywhere anytime soon. Elijah laughed softly. Martha always said the same thing. Elijah Washington, don't you dare talk about leaving me. You're too stubborn to die. She was right about that, Josephine said, squeezing his hand. Now, why don't you rest for a bit? It's been quite a day. Elijah nodded, suddenly aware of the fatigue in his bones. Wake me before dinner. Of course, Daddy. As Josephine left him to rest, Elijah opened his suitcase and carefully removed a small wooden box inlaid with mother-of-pearl Martha's jewelry box, repurposed to hold her ashes. He placed it gently on the nightstand beside the photograph. Well, Martha, he whispered to the box, we made it back to San Francisco, and you wouldn't believe how we got here. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a rarity for San Francisco. Elijah, dressed in his Sunday suit again, stood with Josephine on Baker Beach. He held Martha's ashes in the wooden box, his weathered hands cradling it as tenderly as they had once held her hands. Marcus stood a respectful distance away, giving father and daughter privacy for this solemn moment. The beach was otherwise empty. He had arranged for it to be closed to the public for an hour. It looks just like it did back then, Elijah said, gazing at the Golden Gate Bridge spanning the entrance to the bay. Martha said it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Josephine smiled. She told me that story so many times, how you two stood right here on your honeymoon and promised each other you'd come back someday. Elijah nodded, his eyes on the horizon. We always meant to, life just got in the way. You're here now, Josephine said softly. Both of you. Elijah opened the box and gazed down at the ashes within. Martha Washington, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. I brought you back to the place you loved. I kept my promise even if it took 59 years. With gentle movements, Elijah walked to the water's edge. The morning tide was coming in, the waves lapping at the sand. As the water touched his shoes, he began to scatter Martha's ashes, watching as they merged with the Pacific Ocean. Travel well, my love, he whispered. I'll see you again someday. When the box was empty, Elijah stood for a long moment, the empty container held against his heart. Then he turned and walked back to where Josephine waited, tears streaming down her face. She's where she wanted to be, Elijah said, his voice rough with emotion but also peaceful. And now we have work to do. Marcus approached cautiously. Mr. Washington, is there anything I can do? Elijah looked at the young entrepreneur, really seeing him for the first time. Behind the expensive suit and the corporate success, he saw a man who cared deeply about the land, about farmers, about the future of agriculture. He saw someone who could help carry Martha's and his legacy forward. Yes, Mr. Chen, Elijah said, his voice finding new strength. You can help me build this institute properly. I have some ideas. I've been working on improvements to my old methods, adaptations for changing climate conditions. If you're serious about this partnership, I'm ready to get started. Marcus's face lit up. Mr. Washington, nothing would make me happier. I have a team of agricultural scientists eager to work with you. Good, Elijah said, because at 78 I don't have time to waste. Josephine linked her arm through her father's. Daddy, are you sure? I thought you were ready to retire. Elijah patted her hand. Josie, your mother always said I'd never retire. That man will die with dirt under his fingernails, she used to tell people, and she was right. But now, instead of just working my own land, I can help others work theirs better. As they walked back across the beach toward the waiting car, Elijah felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For 2 years since Martha's passing, he had been existing rather than living, going through the motions of farm life without the joy it had once brought him. Now he had a new purpose, a way to honor Martha's memory and to ensure that the knowledge he had gained through decades of working the land would not be lost. In the car, Marcus outlined the next steps. We'll need to draft a formal agreement, of course, but I'd like to schedule a press conference to announce the establishment of the Martha and Elijah Washington Institute for Sustainable Agriculture. Would next week be too soon? Elijah exchanged a glance with Josephine. I need to get back to my farm first. There are arrangements to be made. Of course, Marcus agreed quickly. What if we hold the press conference in Atlanta? That would be closer to your home. The farm, Elijah corrected. Hold it at the farm, let people see where these methods were developed, where Martha and I worked the land for over 50 years. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. That's perfect. It will make the announcement more authentic, more connected to the land we're trying to protect. As they drove through San Francisco toward the airport, Elijah gazed out at the city that had played such an important role in his and Martha's story. He had come here to say goodbye to his wife, to fulfill a promise made long ago. He was leaving with a new promise, to share the knowledge they had accumulated together, to help other farmers succeed in an increasingly challenging world. At the airport, the private jet waited on the tarmac. Captain Reynolds greeted them with the news that they were cleared for immediate takeoff. Back to Atlanta, Mr. Washington? Elijah nodded. Back to Georgia. There's work to be done. As the jet climbed into the clear California sky, Elijah took one last look at the Golden Gate Bridge and the Pacific Ocean beyond, where Martha's ashes now mingled with the waters she had loved. Goodbye, my love, he whispered. Thank you for everything. 6 months later, Elijah Washington stood on the porch of his farmhouse, watching as cars pulled into the makeshift parking area that had been set up in the fallow North Field. Today was the official opening of the Martha and Elijah Washington Institute for Sustainable Agriculture, and people had come from across the country to attend. The old farmhouse and barn had been carefully restored, but not modernized beyond recognition. The Institute's new research buildings, constructed with sustainable materials and designed to blend with the rural landscape, stood a respectful distance from the original structures. Solar panels glinted in the Georgia sunshine, providing power to the entire complex. Josephine emerged from the house, dressed in a suit that would have made Martha proud. It's almost time, Daddy. The press is already setting up. Elijah nodded, straightening his tie. At 79, he stood a little straighter these days, his purpose renewed. The past 6 months had been among the busiest of his life, working with agricultural scientists to document his methods, speaking to groups of farmers about sustainable practices, mentoring young people interested in farming careers. Marcus Chen's car pulled up, and the young entrepreneur stepped out, waving to Elijah before being immediately surrounded by staff members with clipboards and questions. In the months since their first meeting, Marcus and Elijah had developed a deep mutual respect. Elijah had discovered that behind Marcus's corporate polish was a man who genuinely cared about the future of farming and who had the business acumen to make the Institute financially sustainable. As the appointed time approached, Elijah made his way to the podium that had been set up in front of the barn. The audience, a mix of farmers, scientists, journalists, and dignitaries, fell silent as he took his place. Elijah looked out at the assembled crowd, at the land that had been his life's work, at the new buildings that would carry that work into the future. And for a moment, he felt Martha beside him, her presence as real as the soil beneath his feet. Thank you all for coming today, he began, his voice clear and strong. My wife Martha and I bought this farm in 1967 with nothing but hope and determination. The land was depleted then, overfarmed, eroded, nearly dead. The previous owner told us we'd never make a living here. A murmur of appreciation rippled through the crowd. Many of them knew the story of how the Washingtons had transformed the exhausted land into one of the most productive small farms in Georgia. Martha and I had a different vision, Elijah continued. We saw not what the land was, but what it could be if we worked with nature instead of against it. It wasn't easy. It took years of trial and error, of watching and listening to the land. But gradually the soil came back to life, and as it did, so did our farm. Elijah gestured to the fields around them, green and vibrant in the spring sunshine. What you see today is the result of decades of care, not forcing the land to produce, but nurturing it so it wants to produce. That's the philosophy behind everything we did here, and it's the philosophy that will guide the Martha and Elijah Washington Institute for Sustainable Agriculture. As Elijah spoke about the Institute's mission, to research, develop, and disseminate sustainable farming practices for small and medium-sized farms. He saw heads nodding in the audience. These were people who understood the challenges facing modern agriculture, who recognized the need for approaches that would protect the land for future generations. In closing, Elijah said, I want to thank Marcus Chen and Agri-Tech Innovations for making this dream a reality, and I want to thank my late wife, Martha, who stood beside me through 5 decades of farming. Everything we accomplished together. The applause was thunderous. As Elijah stepped back from the podium, Marcus stepped forward to cut the ribbon across the entrance to the new research facility. Cameras flashed, recording the moment for posterity. Hours later, after the last guest had departed, Elijah sat on his porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Josephine brought out 2 glasses of sweet tea and joined him. "You did it, Daddy," she said, handing him a glass. "Mom would be so proud." Elijah sipped his tea, his eyes on the distant horizon. "We did it, Josie, all of us together." In the fading light, he could see the outline of the private jet that had brought several VIP guests to the ceremony, now preparing for departure from the small airstrip at the edge of his property. From denied entry to a commercial first-class cabin to having a private jet land on his own farm, the journey had been extraordinary. "You know," Elijah said, "when I was standing at that gate at the Atlanta airport, being told I couldn't board in first class, I was angry. Not just about the ticket, but about all the times in my life I'd been told I couldn't do something, couldn't go somewhere, couldn't be something." Josephine nodded, understanding in her eyes. "And now," Elijah smiled, a smile full of wisdom and peace, "now I understand that sometimes what seems like a denial is actually a redirection. I wasn't meant to be on that commercial flight. I was meant to be on that private jet meeting Marcus, starting this new chapter." "A pretty amazing chapter," Josephine observed, watching as the private jet took off, climbing into the evening sky. "Yes," Elijah agreed, "but you know what Martha would say about all this?" Josephine laughed. "She'd say, 'Elijah Washington, don't you let all this attention go to your head. You've still got chores to do tomorrow.'" Elijah chuckled, the sound warm in the gathering dusk. "That's exactly what she'd say, and she'd be right." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Elijah Washington felt a profound sense of contentment. He had honored Martha's memory, not just by scattering her ashes at Baker Beach, but by ensuring that their life's work would continue to bear fruit long after they were gone. The seeds they had planted, both literally in the soil of their farm and figuratively in their sustainable farming methods, would continue to grow and flourish. Tomorrow, there would indeed be chores to do. There were always chores on a farm, but now those daily tasks were part of something larger, something that stretched beyond the boundaries of his land and into the future. The Martha and Elijah Washington Institute for Sustainable Agriculture would carry their legacy forward, helping farmers across the country and around the world work with nature to produce food sustainably. From denied a seat in first class to having his name on an institute that could change the future of farming, it was a journey Elijah Washington could never have imagined when he stepped off that bus at the Atlanta airport. But as Martha had always told him, "The good Lord works in mysterious ways, Elijah. Our job is just to keep planting seeds and have faith they'll grow." And grow they had, beyond his wildest dreams. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.